Good evening and welcome to the regular session of the Norwood City Council. Would you please rise? Oh, yeah. For the prayer. Our Father, as a body we congregate in the council chambers, pray for the life of thy guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzal. Here. Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Thompson. Here. Ms. Stevenson.
Present.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Here.
Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Mr. Braden.
Here.
All members are present who are on the call. I am presiding because Donna Lake is not able to be with us tonight. We do have a few requests to amend the agenda, and those include adding an introductory reading of an ordinance, authorizing the Service Safety Director to sign Exhibit 1, pressure regulating valve maintenance agreement between the City of Norwood and the City of Cincinnati to maintain the City of Norwood water system and declaring an emergency. We also have a request to add a Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee meeting report. Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you. So I would recommend also that we remove the veto override under unfinished business. The veto override of the resolution requesting a proposal from Greater Cincinnati Waterworks for management of the City of Norwood's water system for 6 months. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the changes that you requested and add in removing the veto override from the agenda.
Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzal.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Motion passes. At this time, we will entertain the minutes of the previous meeting. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Madam President. Move to approve the minutes as if read.
Mr. Bonsall, is that a second?
I second that.
Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzal.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All in favor, the motion passes. That takes us to requests to address council on agenda items. We do have a couple here. Let's see here. One is Nicholas Lingenfelter, and that is regarding an ordinance that we'll consider. It's on our agenda as resolution number 4. And at that time, we'll have a presentation to further give context to that resolution. So he's going to come speak at that time. We also have another request to address council on that item, and we are going to have that address on that same resolution number 4 at this time. Susan Daniels.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you. If you could give your name, address, and share.
My name is Susan Daniels. Address is 2063 Maple Avenue, and I am the Vice President of the Norwood Historical Society. The number 4 resolution to demolish or potentially demolish the U.S. playing cards. I'm not one to publicly announce my opinion, but this one definitely struck a chord with me, considering we're history people. So I typed up something. I'm going to read it. And I can email it to Leslie so she can send it out. So the statement is in response to recent notification of possible demolition of the U.S. Playing Cards building located at 4590 Beach Street. The Norwood Historical Society mission statement is to collect, preserve, exhibit, interpret, publish, and educate about the history of Norwood, Ohio. Preserving historic buildings in Norwood is what is needed. Norwood has lost too many historic structures due to possible new development. A buyer comes in and promises great economic turnaround for Norwood in exchange for demolishing a historic building. So far, only Rookwood has made a great accomplishment. The 1960s and 70s were decades that Norwood went through an urban renewal development plan. Quality Inn is an example of that plan. The structure that was demolished to construct the Quality Inn housed several small tenant spaces, and that was made up of brick and Norwood character. Surrey Square is another large structure that was also constructed on Montgomery Road that also replaced several small tenant spaces. Just think of how different Montgomery Road would look today if original buildings weren't being demolished for new construction. While it's hard to predict how buildings and businesses will handle time and change, it's even harder to look back at the past and say, what if we went another route? We lost some building to demolition and was promised a better replacement. So how long is that going to take for us? The U.S. Playing Cards was built by Samuel Hannaford. Samuel was an American architect that constructed over 300 buildings locally, including Music Hall and Cincinnati City Hall. On June 30th, 2015, the U.S. Playing Cards building was placed on the National Registry of Historic Places. And this is through the National Park Service, and the reference number is 1500044. The National Register of Historic Places is the official list of nation's historic places worthy of preservation. Authorized by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, the National Park Service's National Register of Historic Places is part of a national program to coordinate and support public and private efforts to identify, evaluate, and protect America's history and archaeologist resources. Not only do you get the benefit of having a historic tax credits on registered buildings, you also get the assistance, education, and grants for preservation efforts. Only 3 locations in Norwood are registered. And that would be Indian Mound, not the cafe, but the actual mound itself, City Hall, and U.S. Playing Cards. Over 95,000 buildings are registered throughout the United States, and 4,000 is Ohio. The Save America's Treasures, or they call it SAT, grant is a matching federal grant already in use for Cincinnati. Grants have been offered down there anywhere from $150,000 to $410,000 to preserve local buildings from being demolished and abandoned. Again, that's a matching grant. After listening to the proposed demolition of the U.S. Playing Cards building, many worries appear since the clock tower may or may not be saved. Even though the wording in the proposal allows the buyer to try and save the clock tower to the best of their efforts, those efforts are typically blindsided by the buyer's financial interests, so then demolishing becomes the easy way out. In the building's best interest, a third-party opinion from engineers and contractors should be presented with preservation needs and cost analysis to support their findings. Majority of Norwood homes are over a century old. Many homeowners take pride in rehabbing their old homes, bringing them back to the original state. I, for one, am one of them. However, with commercial property owners, only a small portion want to preserve historic buildings, while others come into a city thinking that they know what's best and build a property that doesn't stylistically fit. For example, would you want to look out your house and see a large blue and white checkerboard building? Unfortunately, I have to look at Quality Inn, so. Those type of commercial property owners don't think about the residents surrounding them. Just get the building done and start collecting rent. Then in about 7 years, sell the building off to a new owner for them to do whatever. I've been in commercial mortgages, so I do see a lot of transfers and assumptions, so I do see a trend, and 7 years is typical for ownership to be transferred over. When Allison and Baptist Church had a potential buyer who wanted to turn it into condos, but was going to keep the exterior, the original exterior and its charm, I was thrilled. So was many other people were thrilled. I reached out to the potential buyer's company and was working on gathering pictures of Allison so they could be displayed inside the building. Well, little did we know that the buyer was going to skip town with people's deposit. So who would have thought that was going to happen? I challenge any buyer coming to Norwood to preserve exterior structures, the character and integrity of an older building. Educate yourself on Norwood's needs, history, its residents, and don't take the easy way out by demolishing century-old buildings. I also challenge city officials, current and future ones, to put your foot down on situations where buyers come in promising economic development by destroying historic buildings and constructing something that doesn't fit. Don't get lost in the buyer's promise when we have examples that prove otherwise. Take your time with decisions, obtain proper facts and forecasts, and decide what's best for Norwood overall. I would also like to see an ordinance that protect the historic nature of our downtown, as well as our outskirts, so that the character isn't lost, as well as our history. A lot of cities, such as Montgomery, have similar ordinances that protect their historic district, so why can't we be one of them? Take a look at Louisville and Lexington, Kentucky. I'm almost done. So much history is preserved there because of the right people who have passion to rehab buildings and the government who protect them. When I visited Lexington this year, I was blown away by the Lexington Distillery District. If you've all ever been down there, it's awesome. This district is a great example of preserving historic buildings and creating a new welcoming space for everyone to enjoy. The district features multiple industrial buildings that occupy distilleries, breweries, restaurants, an ice cream shop that's been on the Food Network, retail, art galleries, and luxury apartments. The exterior of the buildings maintain the original brick features, while the interior provides a modern industrial flair. The district is a 25-acre piece of property, home to the James E. Pepper Distillery that was abandoned for nearly 50 years, before being revived in 2008. Working in phases, this district has increased popularity among tourists, locals, and making it great for a walkable property. Our families enjoy the district's restaurants, while bar enthusiasts enjoy the nightlife of live music and beer tastings. For those that may not know, I'm also creating the Norwood Healthy History Trail through the Go Vibrant, which is a nonprofit organization, so that we can continue on with our Million Step Challenge each year. Walking signs are going to be placed throughout Norwood. I'll get you guys' approval much later on that one. And to be placed in front of older buildings and to display their history. U.S. playing cards was going to be on my trail. The face of the building is iconic to Norwood, as well as its history. When you look down Park Avenue and you see all these century-old Victorians and four-square homes, what will the end look like in the near future? It will probably look like the majority of the newer apartment complexes with no character and charm. That's just what I think they look like. But what if it looked different? What if it looked different than the rest by maintaining the original exterior, including the clock tower, and turning it into the Norwood Engagement District? Just throwing that name out there. Think of the kind of business and respect you would get if you went the historic route. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. At this time, we will continue on to reports of standing committees. That's me, I know. I'm shuffling to get to my report so I can share it with you. Alrighty, so the Economic Development and Community Engagement Committee. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we are your Committee of Economic Development and Community Engagement, to whom was referred Off-Pike Market, Economic Development, and the CRA agreement with Ventura Commons LLC. The committee met on November 7th at 6 to discuss MOU elements with Off-Pike Market and City of Norwood. The committee was asked to consider expressing interest in an MOU as a way to begin deepening exploration of future ways to partner with Off-Pike Market, whose goal is to be a blessing to Norwood through the incubation of businesses in an underutilized city-owned building that has historical significance and potential to serve as an economic catalyst to our community. Community members present supported the partnership opportunity, calling it a risk worth taking, since many people would enjoy seeing the market open again. The committee chair will have additional conversation with the law department, Off-Pike Market, and other stakeholders to determine what initial details are needed to secure funding and pursue other opportunities to consider development of the space. HCDC was present, and they presented the Small Business Assistance Program final report for services provided this past year to Norwood through funding support from Duke Energy. 16 organizations engaged in some way with the program, 7 of which were startups. 2 organizations that experienced significant support were Norwood Together, a newly formed development corporation, and Off-Pike Market, a business incubator and convener of small businesses. The report included maps that describe the existing condition of parcels on Montgomery Road and demographic data to help profile the population of Norwood by household size, income, and type, among other descriptors. Norwood is home to HCDC, and their staff will continue to support economic development in the city. The committee also discussed amending the operation of the CRA 18-2009 ordinance, developing a negotiating committee to include multiple stakeholder views on development proposals, requesting administrative reports on authorized action, and finalizing the Ventura Commons LLC CRA agreement. The committee recommends using the Ohio CRA enforcement language to clarify the role of the negotiation committee, including a new section in CRA ordinances to request a copy of signed agreements, and that the Ventura Commons LLC CRA agreement be approved. It is scheduled to be on the agenda today. It is. The committee also recommends that any annual review of existing agreements be reported to this body as part of the revised CRA 18-2009 operations. Respectfully submitted, Leslie Stevenson, Chairperson, James Bonsall, John Braden, and Eric Thompson. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you. I move that the committee report be received and filed.
Is that second, Mr. Thompson?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any discussion? I have a point of discussion. So in our committee meeting, we talked a lot about the negotiating committee. We also talked a lot about the MOU elements. And as that conversation with those other entities, the Law Department and Off-Pike, take place, and hope to bring back to this body this year a start of what I think we were calling just the initial letter of intent. The organization indicated it'd be very helpful if the city had a position on partnering, just that. So that's something wanted to make sure you were aware of. If you didn't hear that in the meeting, it wasn't clear in the report. The other thing is the committee has the opportunity to still put before you the resolution and or ordinance for the negotiation committee. If you don't have the enforcing program details, we'll get those to you. But just wanted to make it clear this is something that we've been working on and discussing for a while, just given the timeline and some of the other responsibilities of different folks. It wasn't ready today, but that is something we hope to get out this year still. Any other questions, comments? All right, so the motion on the floor is to receive and file the report. Call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes.
All right, thank you. The motion passes. We'll have the Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee report.
Yeah, thank you so much. So to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Finance, Budget, and Audit, to whom was referred 2019 and 2020 appropriations, beg leave to submit the following report. We discussed 2019 appropriation changes. Most changes were due to TIF fund TIF fund changes. The water fund will need to be increased due to changes in the Certificate of Estimated Resources. For 2020 appropriations, they matched the 2020 spending levels in the Financial Recovery Plan. Respectfully submitted, James Bonsall, Andrew Clark, John Braden, Leslie Stevenson.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you. I move that the committee report be accepted.
Mr. Sanker, is that second?
Yes.
Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All right, all present voting yes, it passes. There are no third or second readings of ordinances or resolutions, so we are on to J, introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions, the first being the ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2019 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you so much. I would move that we have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Clark.
Yes, thank you.
Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
Have the readings, please.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2019 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2019 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2019 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you so much. I would move that the ordinance be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Clark. So that discussion, Mr. Bonsall?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So, just wanted to quickly overview some of the changes that are in the for the Exhibit A for the 2019 ones. So, most of these changes are due to just changes in TIF funds. So, essentially, the bond council every year reviews how much was received and for those funds and property taxes and all this other stuff. And so, we had to make some changes there. You'll see the sewer fund was reduced due to the item that we found earlier in the year. Or that was found earlier in the year, and then the water fund was increased some part, but not the whole part, because we didn't need the full amount to increase for the rest of the year. So there's also Fund 48, Capital Improvements Fund 2, $452,000. Essentially, that's just a pass-through fund. There's no cash that will actually be used. Basically, we have to record the amount of grants that we get, and so for the street repaving on Forest Avenue, and I think it's where that's from. But essentially, we have to record that as a pass-through. So in order to do that, we have to appropriate money, but there's zero cash in that fund, so there will be no money that will be spent.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
And just a quick question. If we remove $2.4 million from the sewage fund and we only increase water fund to 1.4, where did the additional money from the sewer fund go?
Yeah. So.
Mr. Bonsall, you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a good question. So essentially, we are, at the beginning of the year for the sewer fund, we had given permission as council through our appropriations that you could spend the full amount that was in the fund. I mean, nobody was going to spend it because it's just a fund that goes straight to MSD. But we had approved those appropriations. But because now money's been moved from the sewer fund to the water fund, where it should have been originally, we need to reduce those. But we don't need to reduce it by the full amount. But we don't need to then increase the water fund by that full amount. We only need to increase the water fund to where it should be to pay the rest of the bills. So the auditor intentionally recommended us not increase the full amount that's in the key because there's not a need to increase it that much. So the money's still there. No money's leaving. It's all still in the water fund. It's just that we're just not increasing it a greater amount just so that we can have better protection over the appropriations.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mrs. Hanrahan?
I'm sorry, and I was having problems hearing you. I want to make sure, the money that was in the sewer fund that should have gone to the water fund, did that all go there? Or were you just saying it's not all going there? I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
No, you're totally fine. So the cash has already been, so the actual
Can
dollars.
you lean into your mic a little
Thank
bit
you.
more?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I can do it. The dollars have already been moved. They were moved months ago. So these are just appropriations. Appropriations are essentially permission to spend. So essentially we're increasing the water fund because they need additional appropriations in order to pay the rest of the water bills for the year.
Is there another question? Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to pass the ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2019. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All present voting yes, it passes. We move on to the second item, ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the city of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31, 2020. Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I would like to move that we have the first reading of this ordinance.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the 2020 permanent appropriations, these are essentially completely reflected in what we've already approved in the financial recovery plan. So as I mentioned at Finance Committee, but the new council, a new administration, they're going to have to approve a new financial recovery plan by the end of March, since our last one that we approved was March 26th. So they will be probably making changes, just knowing there's a new administration. There'll probably, be some additional staff maybe here, maybe there will be less staff there, what have you, but so things will be moving around a lot. And in that new financial recovery plan, once they pass it, they will update the appropriation. So, we call these the permanent appropriations, in which they are, but they will very much change early next year once the new financial recovery plan is passed.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to have the first reading of the ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the City of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31, 2020. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
Please have the first reading.
Ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the City of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31, 2020, and declaring an emergency.
We move on to the third item, the ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a community reinvestment area agreement with Ventura Commons LLC and declaring an emergency. Mr. Sanker?
I'd like to at least have the first reading.
There's a motion on the floor to have the first reading. Is that a second, Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we may want to consider having all three readings today. I know that they are eager to, from what I've heard, to get started on, and we heard from them at one of the committee meetings, they're eager to get started on transforming that building at Sherman and Montgomery and ready to get going to get that to be, a banquet hall and office space and such. And I think they would have already started, but we were navigating our process with the CRAs, with the Economic Development Committee. So I would recommend that we do all three readings. It's basically a very standard agreement that we've given to many others, and the law department has reviewed it, and there's some protections in there for the city as well. So, if we do one reading, it's fine, but I would just recommend that we might want to do it more than that.
Any other discussion?
Madam
Mr. Sanker?
President, I'll amend to have all three readings of the ordinance, if the second would amend.
Mrs. Hanahan? You've discussion? Question?
No. I wouldn't mind seeing the first and second reading, but I think we need to have the third reading at a different time.
Is there a particular concern?
Just because it was it's out here, I think we need the first and second reading instead of taking it all the way for all three readings.
Mr. Sanker?
Then I'll amend to have the first and second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to have the first and second reading this evening. Any other discussion? Is that a question or comment?
Sure, why not? That sounds perfectly reasonable. I can agree with the first and second. Thanks.
Okay. I'm seeking a little more clarity. This was presented at our last regular meeting. So if there's a question or comment that we need clarified, it would be great to know that so we can do that. So. Call roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
No.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
Would you please have the first and second reading?
Ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a community reinvestment area agreement with Ventura Commons LLC and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a community reinvestment area agreement with Ventura Commons LLC and declaring an emergency.
Madam Chair, just a point of...
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to make a motion that we have now the third reading of this ordinance. I guess would that be in order now? or at least I'll just make it. So I'd like to move that we have the third reading of the ordinance as well.
Is there a second? Mr. Thompson? Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you. So, I mean, basically, I think we just can decide, it takes 6 votes to have the third reading. So, I mean, if it fails, that's fine. We can just go ahead and have the third reading in 2 weeks. But just wanted to throw the motion out there in case council is willing to entertain that.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Saker?
Question through the chair to the law department. If the third reading isn't on the agenda, wouldn't the agenda have to be approved or amended prior to having a third reading?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be honest with you, off the top of my head, I'm not sure how this plays out. You might want to have a motion to amend the agenda to add the third reading. You still have to, and then have the vote on it. I'm not sure why council would decide to have the first 2 readings and then come back and have the third. If they wanted all 3, I would have expected they would have all 3 the first go round. But if you're going to do this, I would recommend, it'd probably be better off to amend the agenda first to add the third reading. It's unusual. I don't think it's ever come up before in my experience. So,
Mr. Moore, I think I'm recalling that under unfinished business in the past, a member of council, per our current rules, can ask for a motion to reconsider something that's voted on in that meeting. Would that also be appropriate instead of a motion to amend?
I think that might be more appropriate, yes, Madam President, Pro Tem.
So it is feasible to have a motion for the third reading of this ordinance under unfinished business if it's made by a member of the body who voted on that in the affirmative. Mr. Ronsell?
Yeah, so, okay, I apologize for voting that wrong then. So I assume that we could have the third reading because we don't make motions to amend the agenda whenever we just have all 3 readings in one motion. So we don't go and amend and say, look, this is an introductory reading of ordinances, and now we're going to amend the agenda. It's like, oh no, instead of doing 1 reading, now we do all 3. So I don't understand why we'd have to amend the agenda. However, I think amending the agenda would be more favorable than to going and trying to reconsider the past, to reconsider the thing that's already passed. Essentially, and I'll put this out there too, if there's anybody else that's going to vote no on having the third reading, then we can just withdraw the motion and move on. So I thought it would be an easier process. I didn't realize, so I apologize to my colleagues on that one.
Mr. Saker?
Question through the chair. I believe you only need a simple majority to have the third reading, if that would be the case.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. I think that if you are going to reconsider a matter, it's basically undo what you did. We're voting to undo what we did and do something else instead. So at that point, it would be to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings. We're going to withdraw. I move that we undo the first 2 readings and move forward with a motion to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings. To be honest, if you amend the agenda and add the third reading, I got to tell you right off the top of my head, I don't know, and I'm not confident that I can figure it out in the next 30 seconds looking at the rules as far as what the legal effect of that is going to be. I would be more confident with we'll reconsider, and then we're going to have suspend the rules and have all 3 readings to do it. I think that if you're trying to find a way to get around the fact that you need 6 votes to pass the thing in one day, that I think would definitely be problematic.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, I'll just say I don't think anybody's trying to find a way to get around the 6 votes. I mean, I fully expect if we made a motion to do the third reading, it would take 6 votes. So, and again, I'll just ask my colleagues again, if there's anybody that would vote no on having all 3 readings, I would please ask, other than Marilyn who already has, I'd ask them to make that known so that we can just move on. If not, we could reconsider it.
Mr. Braden?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I just think that if there's, personally, if there's questions that maybe somebody on this council has that wasn't present during our discussions, that we should just allow them a little time to figure out exactly what their questions may be and present them. That's where that's where my vote was on that, so, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Braden.
So,
Mr. Bonsall?
thank you. So with that being said, I appreciate that, Mr. Braden. I will withdraw my motion to have the third reading, since that's what we were.
That was seconded by Mr. Thompson. Are you willing to withdraw as well?
Sure.
Okay. So, thank you all. This is always exciting when I sit up here. I don't know how that happens, but I just appreciate this crash course in local government. Mrs. Hanrahan, I just want to remind you in particular, since you expressed maybe some hesitation there, that we did ask for questions and comments at the last regular meeting, and I think you did express some then. If you have additional questions that need to be resolved, please make that known to me so that the committee can have that in consideration, and or the law department if they're specifically legal. I appreciate Mr. Braden being willing to pause and acknowledge it's important for everyone to have their questions answered, but we need those to be surfaced so that we can get some resolve. So with that in mind, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is a resolution determining that demolition can go forward at parcel 651-0019-0125, former United States Playing Card Facility, and declaring an emergency. And at this time, I'd like to ask Nicholas Lingenfelter to come. He's going to present a presentation on the monitor. We're going to do our best for the folks watching online to cover the monitor so that that can be seen. Just to create awareness, the presentation will be about 20 minutes, and it will further describe and give context to what is being potentially resolved tonight.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to make this so everybody can hear me back there as well. So, my name is Nick Lingenfelter, and I'm Vice President of Development for PLK Communities. I'm joined by my counterpart, Mark Orson, who's also one of our other Vice Presidents of Development, as well as our Head of Construction this evening. We wanted to give you a little bit of background on this property, which we'll describe in a little more detail. Just to give you a little bit of context, I've been working on this property now from an acquisition side for close to 3 years, so I'll be able to give you as many details as possible. I've walked every tunnel with asbestos inspectors. I've basically walked about every inch of that property more times than any other property we've ever owned. So again, I'll give you a little background on PLK Communities. PLK Communities is a locally owned and operated apartment operator here out of Cincinnati. So we are headquartered in Cincinnati. All of our investors are our management team. We have no outside investors whatsoever. We have approximately 4,700 apartments in the city of Cincinnati and roughly 6,500 apartments in 2 states. So again, we have 125 full-time employees out of Cincinnati. Every one of our management team calls Cincinnati our home, and we've been watching this site for close to 10 years now sit. The last 5, particularly the last 3, deteriorate at a pretty rapid pace. So I'm going to walk through some of that deterioration, what's going on. We do have the fire department here as well to answer some potential questions, as well as the building department, who have all walked that with us as well. So also another question that we get a lot, we are long-term holders. So typically we do not sell our properties. Our typical hold is over 10 years. Again, we are a local owner operator and we build for the long term. So we don't cut corners, and we'll kind of show you some of the product that we build. To give you an idea of what our apartment assets look like, this is one of our newest apartment complexes built over in Eastgate, Class A apartments. Everything we build from a new construction standpoint is always in a property. It is something that we want to, again, own for the long term. We put a significant investment into every one of our properties. I also help oversee some of our condominium and home construction as well. So we have some new townhomes that I have that I'm overseeing over in Oakley right now next to St. Cecilia. And I just wanted you to kind of get an idea of the finish levels of what we put inside of our units. So again, everything we build is a high quality project, high quality materials, and we don't cut corners, again, because this is our home. We're not here to come and go in a heartbeat. So again, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. So I personally started working on this project with the seller around December of 2015. I've been working on this project off and on with them since that point. In that same time frame, they have had 5 other people under contract to buy this property, all well-known large-scale developers. In addition to, they had another 15 developers, including national developers, all come in trying to find a way to make this property work. Ultimately, including ourselves, we walked away in about May of this year as well, after spending close to $250,000 trying to figure out how to save this property. When we had that done, we did an extensive analysis of the structure. So we went through, we looked at all the parapets, we looked at the roofs, we checked everything. It is in very rough shape, in particular the wood section of the property. So I'll kind of walk through the map when I show you what we're going to do there. But there's holes in the ceilings, the ceiling beams are snapping, and the other major issue right now is that there's essentially no copper left in the facility. So every single electrical line in that facility, I'll show you photos of live boxes that were cut. People stole the copper out of them. So now the issue is, and while the fire department's here as well, there's no way to even heat the facility. To give you a scale of how large this is, because I know the Historical Society mentioned this earlier, and I do respect this. Trust me, we bought this thing trying to figure out how to save it. Phase 1 was going to be over $68 million just for the front buildings, and almost $95 million to save. I'll walk through how the historic tax credit works, because the tax law changes roughly 2 years ago significantly changed how this deal could be approached, which is another reason that has continued to sit the past couple years. And one of the most economically vibrant times, people can't pull this off. And again, to understand, it's bigger than Music Hall. It is bigger than Union Terminal. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent on those projects. Not a single one of them was privately funded. So again, we do want to go into what that was going to be. At the time we were looking to redo this, we wanted to put in 300 apartments into this project, as well as ground floor retail and a mix of other uses along the highway. The problem with the highway land is you can't get to it. So nobody's going to drive through the current facility as it sits today to go develop those highway lots. It's just not safe. You're going down an alley that has semi-traffic. Again, this was built more for function than form. It is a Sam Hannaford structure. It was built anywhere between 1899 and 1922. So I'll kind of walk through as well when those were added. I think the most notable thing that we are doing everything we can to try and save is the clock tower. Most people don't realize the clock tower isn't even original to the building. The clock tower was designed around 1922 and was added on at that point. It is a concrete structure around a wooden structure. So that's one of the reasons we believe that we can save it, is because you have 4 concrete piers that go all the way up to the roof. So we'll go through that as well. Again, when we were looking at this deal the first time around, it had a $23 million financing gap. What that means is the cost of the project versus the value of the first phase had a $23 million gap. Even with historic tax credits, on a good day you might hit break even. It's not a risk that anybody, especially people investing, we don't have outside investors. We're not pulling Wall Street money. And the other issue is when you have those people, they'll pull out. The second the market slows, they leave. We don't leave. This is our money, and we're not going to go buy a project and then turn around and say, throw our hands up in the air. I mean, we live here. Every one of us lives in Cincinnati. So again, we were looking at a mixed-use project, and that's what we were proposing today. We're also going to propose to save the smokestack, the clock tower, the original factory from 1903. The original factory was built in 1903, actually sat up on Beach Street and was slid back. We are going to, our goal is to save that and make that a community center, wedding event space, something else that is then open to the public that can be saved. It is also our goal to save the factory on the corner, which is the 4-story factory. One of the reasons we're looking at saving that is most of those floors are 2 to 3 foot thick of concrete. So when you look at trying to take that down, you're talking $1.7 million just to demolish that building. It actually is almost more economically feasible to make it a parking garage and then help service the whole development. So you'll have the factory that was there and other buildings that are notable and savable as we can save them. All right, so let's talk about the tax credit issues, because I know that's the question that everybody has, is why can't you go get historic tax credits and go bridge this gap or find another way? So, as I said earlier, the tax credit law changed roughly 2 years ago with the 2017 Tax and Jobs Act, or whatever they called it at that point. And that eliminated what was known as the 10% credit. So I'll call this, historic light and historic regular. Historic light allowed a 10% tax credit on projects that maybe had to make some minor changes to it that structurally couldn't all stay in place. That went away. Now the only credit available is what's known as the 20% credit. The problem with the 20% credit is you must save every structure on that property. You must save a flammable shed. Not sure how you're going to do it. You must save a power plant that will cost $7 million to clean up. Not sure who can rent something that's going to take $7 million. Every single building must be saved or you disqualify yourself for historic tax credit dollars. We've brought in multiple consultants, national accounting firms. I have full construction budgets to show what these numbers are. Again, this project, as much as we want to save it, I don't know what to do with the power plant. I mean, and the problem there lies in when it was put on the registry, instead of taking the power plant down first, somebody aggressively put it on the registry, and they probably should have waited until most like the flammable shed, the water tower's down, but that building's there. What do you do with it? It's not very big, but you can't remove it. You can't even take the concrete posts out of the ground. It just makes it pretty difficult to work with. The other issue with the tax credits is they changed what was known as the vesting period. So when you get tax credits, you have a tax credit investor. And the tax credit investor then buys that credit for a discount on what they would owe in their federal income taxes. The vesting period changed from a 12-month span to a 5-year span. So by making somebody earn their money over a 5-year span versus one, it actually reduced the value or the discounted value of the tax credits, then subsequently reduced. So say from a 90 to 95% buy rate historically to the low 70s today. That coupled with the fact you would now have to phase this project meant that our tax credits could not even physically begin vesting until every single piece of the property was redeveloped. So even if we looked to phase this as the front building and the rear buildings, say that took 5 to 7 years to build, well then you had another 5 years before that vesting period started before you could refinance or do anything with those tax credit investors. So us as an investor couldn't even refinance our construction loan for roughly 12 to 15 years. That is not a risk any private company in there would ever take. And again, that's why you're seeing these large projects taken on by city governments or something else. But again, you're talking about potentially a $90 million project just for the first historic buildings. And then you're going to have other issues there as well. But again, I think the other thing that we hear a lot too is, hey, why don't you put condominiums in there? Well, again, back to that sale trigger. If you were to physically put condominiums in there, you can't sell those until all those credits vest. No different than what you see downtown and over the Rhine. They rent them out for a period of time and then they convert them. But if you take historic dollars, you cannot sell the property until the credits are vested. So the idea that, oh, well, a condo could sell for more than an apartment really doesn't hold water, because if you can't sell it, you have an overpriced rental unit that you couldn't use. So other significant challenges that I want you to know. Just so you know, too, we have been working since roughly November of last year with OEPA, which is the Ohio EPA, and SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, intending to try to save this property. The largest issue on this site right now is the asbestos. When remediation begins, this will be the largest asbestos remediation project in the entire state of Ohio. Just let that sink in. There is no other building in Ohio with more asbestos sitting in it right now that would have to be remediated at the same time. We're talking a minimum of $2 million just to begin removing asbestos there. The other issue that we have is all those boilers, they actually packed asbestos between every single brick. So all the boilers have to be manually disassembled in a negative pressure chamber. Again, getting back to what it's going to cost to fix the property. We want to save it, we would love to save it, but if I can't get historic dollars, I can't pay the historic cost for front of the property and not for the rest. It doesn't work that way. There are also 14 noted EPA issues that were brought up in our phase 1, and I have them up there. They range everything from, there's TCE in the ground, which is, hope I don't botch this, trichloroethylene. At some point, somebody spilled chemicals in the ground. There's the far building to the right. I believe that's building 7 and 7A. It was originally developed for the Grew and Watch Company. TCE is actually seeping through the floors. So there's multiple buildings there that had vapor issues. So the only way you get around that is you literally break up all the floors. You come in and put a vapor barrier is what it's called, and you have to have it's equivalent like a radon mitigation system in active buildings. So you have to think about that. Every single floor there, in order to have anybody reside in it, will have to be taken apart and reassembled from the ground up, or from the bottom up while the building is still standing. Again, an issue that starts making this thing so cost prohibitive. TCE, just to give you another thing as well, You couldn't put any residences or any office in a building because it has been known to kill babies in the womb. That is a well-known fact with the EPA. So if you're going to be building on any site with TCE, again, one of our notions is we know where it's roughly located at. From a new construction standpoint, we could build a vapor barrier to start with, but to take an existing building apart with the vapor barrier in becomes very cost prohibitive. Again, there's about 11 other issues that were related to the manufacturing of the site, but it's a significant cost to clean up. Again, back to the point that I brought up earlier, all the copper's removed. There's just no way to physically heat the building. And now the concern is that the sprinklers won't make it through the winter. I mean, let's be honest. The next couple days, we're already a little nervous. We don't own it. But what happens if those sprinklers break? And that's why the fire department's going to talk about that a little bit too. You've got wood structures essentially getting sprayed on that are collapsing as they are, and you have no way to heat the sprinkler systems. So it's a very big issue that's going to be coming to a head very quickly. Excuse me. So let me kind of tell you where we're at. So like I said earlier, we dropped this property around May of this year, and around October 17th, so 3-4 weeks ago, the seller called us and said, hey, we've got a 24-hour fire watch. We don't think this thing's making through the winter. They're a national owner. There's nobody in town. You call the maintenance guy, he lives in Dayton, and it's not what they do. So they said, can you basically, we don't want to take this thing through the winter. Can you give us a number to take it off our hands? And we said, fine, you know what, we'll give you a number. It's not what you think it is. It's basically almost nothing. But the only way we close on this property is if we can do a selective demolition of certain buildings that we don't see staying for the long term. So again, we signed the contract last Monday, the 4th. This isn't, we basically closed. We've already started working with O'Rourke and a couple other guys on what's going to take for asbestos remediation, demolition, asbestos surveys, all that stuff that has to be completed. And as I mentioned before, being the largest asbestos site in Ohio, the EPA will be on the job site 1 to 2 days a week because it is that large. So last Monday, it was also brought to our attention on the same day roughly that we signed it by Keith that we needed to have an emergency ordinance, something that we had never seen before. It's not really posted online. We were going to just go ahead and move forward, and thank goodness he brought it up because we did not want to be buying a property that we would be sitting potentially having liability that somebody could die in the building. And honestly, I'm blown away that somebody hasn't died there yet. You have open elevator shafts. You can watch video of kids jumping between the roofs. It is so large you cannot secure it. You're talking almost 600,000 square feet. It's nearly impossible. So again, I wanted to show you all some photos. So these are actual live electric boxes. The one on the right sitting in the power plant. They have cut the wires, and there is no copper wire anywhere in any box in the building. Gone. These are actual main support beams on the 4th floor of what everybody called, it's around the clock tower. So the clock tower is actually in this building right in here. Whoops, didn't mean to go that way. Hold on. Cool. You can see the main supports are actually cracked, and what that's from is due to basically a weakened roof system. There's water been running down it for 2 to 3 years. So all these beams are now snapped. You can also see this is all part of the asbestos that has to be remediated. But one of our concerns is, one, if the sprinklers go off and all of a sudden the friable asbestos gets let loose in the room, you're going to have to negative pressure those rooms. That's going to be a problem. And 2, if you get any type of snow load or anything on that roof, that thing's gone. Those are things the size of tree trunks. They're huge. So it's a major issue that's going to bring itself to a head pretty quickly. You can also see over here, we have main support beams that are completely gone as well. They're supporting it with about a 4x4 right here. I mean, it's just gone. There's no way to reinforce it. So, and then finally, the bottom right picture, this shows you one of the HVAC ducts. And again, you can see all the copper's been pulled from every major electrical box in the building. There's just no way to secure it. I mean, the police have been in there, the fire department's been in there. They'll be glad to talk about it as well. So, what I wanted to lay out for everybody as well is what a demolition sequence would look like. So how would we go about demolishing this? What would it look like in our mind? So what you see down here is actually, I'll just walk through the building numbers so everybody can see them. Can you guys all hear me in the back okay too? Cool. All right, so this is building 1. Building 1 was the original factory, built around 1903. This was actually the original factory. It was moved from here to the back of the property in 1903. In roughly 1899, they started pouring the foundations for this building, and in 1902, they finished what was then known as buildings 2, because this is a building, 3, and 4. You also will note on there it says Building 5. What is Building 5? Building 5 is actually the clock tower. Clock tower is approximately a 20 by 20 rectangular concrete structure. Again, if you go through there, there's no actual stairs to the clock tower from floors 1, 2, or 3. The only way to those clock tower is from floor 4 up. Okay? Then we have buildings 6 and 6A. These were actual storage. And then finally you had the shipping docks, which I mentioned before was the Gruen Watch Company. We know that TCE is located somewhere in here. There's about 30 monitoring wells we drilled earlier this year. So again, we've talked about $250,000 initial work. The next round of tests were $300,000. That's when we said, you know what, we are out. It became too much. And then finally, you have the original factory, and then you have the power plant, and then what was the water tower still there. So what our demolition sequence would look like if we proceeded would be we would actually take this down because this is concrete in the front but a wooden structure in the rear. Okay? You have what's called a PIV, which is your fire valves in here. We would use these fire valves then to be able to spray the demolition work, and then we would start pulling the buildings this way. So they would kind of feather the buildings in, and they'd have a laydown area, and they would be able to truck it all out. Then, while all this is going on, go over the asbestos remediation plan. They would be remediating the underground tunnels, because there's multiple underground tunnels throughout the facility. And then you also have, again, the negative pressure and everything else that has to be done on the power plant itself. And then finally, the last building here, we would coordinate with Multicolor on how that would work. Again, we've been working with their work. They're not the most economical, but they know what they're doing, and they have a national reputation for doing it. It's not something you can mess around with in any stretch. So again, we would bring down this building first, the main building second, and then finally second and third and fourth, and then you have this building's 5, and roughly somewhere between those two you're going to be drilling these down. So if they're saying, hey, we can't take it down right now, it'll get pushed until the power plant's next. So my colors aren't showing up, so I apologize. This is actually a list of every building that will be abated. It's every building. So the way the abatement will work is they'll actually start in the underground tunnels here, because the underground tunnels then connect the power plant to the main buildings. Once the underground tunnels are down, we'll start working in the first building, which we will tear down at that point. Then they will work on the main building, and then at the same time, you'll see the main building will start going to the power plant, the last one, and then these two will be the last two we abate. But again, those are the structures we intend to keep because, one, this is probably the most architecturally significant structure on the property. Hands down, it's the coolest one there. The rest of it's just factory space. And then this building we intend to hopefully long-term keep as a parking garage and still have the manufacturing presence that was that building. Again, to give you an idea of what it would take to do this, here, the abatement schedule is the top and the demolition is the bottom. So as we abate, then we demolish. We abate, then we demolish. The biggest one on here, you'll see, that's the power plant. That power plant is a full 3 months of remediation. So if we get this, what are we willing to commit to you? So what we are committing to is within 60 days of closing, all demolition, asbestos remediation surveys will be completed with signed contracts. We commit within 60 days, we will get this thing moving. Within 90 days, we are committing to start work on those selected demolitions we talked about. And other than EPA approvals, weather, or any other reasonable thing outside of our control, whether it be, hey, you got to just wait till this weekend, we will not stop. Our goal is to have this thing cleared and ready by next summer so we can begin EPA testing to roughly then, at that point, go ahead and start getting the building going. It will take us all of 12 to 18 months to get the EPA to sign off on this stuff. We will have to get a covenant not to sue. We will have to meet all their standards. There's wells underground that have to be shut down. There's a lot of work that happens. But what I will tell you is we're not just going to sit idle. We're not just going to sit out there with $7, $8, $9 billion of our money in cash sitting out there. We're going to move this site. So what we're going to do at that point is we fully anticipate this will take it has to have economic development. If we're going to compete with the sites across the highway, we have to work together. I imagine we're going to community councils. We'll be here in front of your council, anywhere we need to go to get everybody on board. And we expect full public engagement. Listen, I'm going to go over what we would like to, what we think is a conceptual idea. We're not married to it. We just want to know that we're bringing the right project here for the community. And we fully expect community feedback before moving forward with that. I also know, I mentioned, I left out the school district. We know we will have to work with the school district as well. We're not leaving that on purpose. So, well, I got turned on us a little bit. But what would this look like if you can see it there? So right now we have the grass boulevard here. The intention is to actually continue the grass boulevard and make it kind of a park in the middle of the property with the clock tower right in the middle. So once you continue that through, we would keep the smokestack, maybe some type of dog park or something over there. Again, more the park-like setting that sits on that point. We would keep the original factory as our parking garage. This would be the clubhouse and wedding kind of event space. It's about 13,000 square feet. So from a clubhouse standpoint for the residential portion, we need about 3,500. So the rest of it is going to be some type of public space. We just don't really know what that is yet. Down this central boulevard, we're envisioning some type of mixed use, whether that's office, apartments, ground floor retail, something like that, that will activate this main boulevard and continue it all the way through. We will then have what we call a senior living component up in the front. So that will be some type of empty nester senior living type product. And then in the back, this will be roughly 6 to 6.5 acres of for sale outlots, whether that's going to be office or retail or something else. Again, these are conceptual ideas to give you how we think potentially the site could lay out. We're going to engage our architects, our engineers. We were using Platt beforehand on the historical side. They're fantastic. I'm sure they'll have some play in this as well. But again, we want to make sure we're building the right project for the community. We fully expect and will commit to having engagement with the community to get there. At that point, I'll take any questions. I do want to show you one other thing too I kind of kept in here. For those of you that, we do have all the blueprints from Hannaford. We found them actually in the building. So we do have those all, they're all scanned in. But this is actually what the front of the building used to look like. So when this thing was built in 1903, this was the building. The clock tower was then built out. So with that, Madam President, I'll be glad to take any questions that you all or anybody may have.
Thank you.
Problem.
It's a very robust presentation. I noted that Acting Chief McCabe is here, available to answer any questions, and Mark Reeves is also here, available to answer questions. Yeah, so members of council, any questions you have? Mr. Sanker.
I would recommend possibly if the chief and Mark would want to come up and just give any comments on their ideas considering the property in its current condition and potential for it.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker.
So just if you want to give a little rundown of what has been going on over there, what you've seen, or what your thoughts are on the building's condition right now.
No problem. So from a fire department standpoint, we're here to talk about safety of the structure. We're neither pro-development or pro-historical society. It's just a matter of community risk and what we're looking at in terms of our exposure to our guys. Currently, right now, we actually have a standing order that we don't go in the building unless we absolutely have to, and if we are in the building, it is absolute respiratory protection for our members. We have made multiple responses to that. We had the current owners cited to court multiple times, and we fully expect to lose the fire protection of that entire facility soon. It's a troublesome thing. They talked about the videos of the kids that were scaling the walls and getting into this. We've had vagrants living in there. It becomes a life safety issue, but primarily it's a huge fire risk in terms of we don't have enough water over there. If that thing lights off, we're in trouble. So I've been in that building multiple times. Before I promoted up the chain, I used to make runs there, and I've walked that building in the middle of the night, and I can tell you in the last 5 years, there's been a fundamental decay of that structure. It's sad. The grandness of that building was beautiful. When Playing Card left, it was tough. But they maintained the facility still while they were still owning it. Upwards of a large 6-figure heating bills to maintain the fire sprinklers. When they were able to offload it to a company who had grand things, we've had nothing but problems. The recent magistrate ruling, they mandated a 24-hour fire watch. And it's, we know it, they cannot physically heat the building. So we're going to have issues. So in terms of what the fire department's position would be, get it on the ground, as much of it as possible, because you have, I think, significant structural issues in the southern portions of the buildings. The concrete building, that thing's rock solid. But you have additional safety issues in terms of respiratory exposure or electrical issues at that building. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Can you tell me what exactly does they mandated a 24-hour fire watch mean?
So in terms of buildings that have fire protection systems, meaning sprinkler systems, they're not maintained. The fire code will allow us to go to court and have a fire watch put in place, meaning that they have to have personnel on scene 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, going around the facility, making sure, watching, they're the live fire alarm, basically. And because that building has been so damaged and vandalized, that it's impossible for them to secure it. And it's probably not the right venue, but I would caution you guys, you really need to look at a building security ordinance in terms of what is expected when a building is vacated. There's plenty of information out there from the U.S. Fire Academy, but that just wasn't done when it went vacant. Really didn't need to when Playing Card owned it, but when these current owners purchased it, that's when we started having trouble. We spent many man hours dealing with a vacant building that provides no revenue to the city, and it's a hazard, and it's an unfortunate reality. And it's a beautiful building in its heyday, but it's troublesome. Inspector Reeves can probably talk more about as much of the building he's seen recently inside of it too.
I don't know what I can add to Nick's presentation. It's pretty good. We had a chance to walk through it about a month ago. Mark Morrison, myself, fire department, probably about 10 of us. It's a mess. These wooden structures are caving in on themselves. Floors are buckled 12, 18 inches high everywhere. Could it be saved? I suppose. What'd you say, 90 million?
Well, that's if you can get the tax credits.
Yeah. It's unsecured. I've seen people get in there over the last, and I was in there probably a year and a half, 2 years ago before a month ago, and it's just getting worse and worse. I mean, it's just, there's no maintenance. Like Tom said, when Playing Card had it at least for 4 years after they went to Hebron, they kept it up. These guys haven't done anything to it. It's just fallen in.
I'll add one more thing too, and even with the process of utilizing the court system to have this done, it's just more time, more effort, and the enforcement issue, it becomes very difficult. They've actually abandoned the fire watch, and we're supposed to be in the court again regarding that, and it's a very difficult situation for a department our size to deal with. It's a massive facility, and we're trying to do our best. We've got record upon record of citations to that group trying to maintain it as a safe building. The reality is it's impossible.
Any other questions or comments? Do you have anything else you want to add to your
I
presentation?
just want to note that we are not the existing owner.
Thank you. When you
No,
started
we
your
just
presentation,
Clear that.
yeah, so PLK is not the existing owner, is what was stated. That is so true. You're hopeful to close next week, is what
Hopefully
you.
close next week and begin work immediately if we can.
Is there a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Could you come up, please?
Oh.
Thank you. Could you just say your name and your role, please?
Rodney Rogers. I'm Rodney Rogers, the president of the Historical Society. I was wondering if there's any way for the architects to at least use the bricks for construction of new buildings. I know that old bricks have been used before. Are they in that condition where they can be used?
Thank you.
So I imagine we're going to save some, because I mean, right now if you take the clock tower off, the first floors basically have nothing there. It's basically concrete columns. So we're going to have to save enough to at least use that.
Yeah, could you come up?
I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So yeah, the way the clock tower works today is only the front side has brick on it. or the front side plus about 12 inches or so. It's not much. So once that building physically comes down, we are going to have to say brick to do that. Also, what I'll point out is we are keeping the main factory as well. So that's one of the larger brick pieces that we have. It's just a matter of how we have to safely remediate it, get the buildings down. I mean, our goal number one is to get the buildings down. If there's a way we can say brick, I'm sure we'll try. I just don't want to commit to something that in the middle of, I mean, you're going to have, cranes and everything taking it down. It's going to be, it's not a house where I can take it down brick by brick, unfortunately.
I was trained in asbestos removal, radioactive and all that, so I understand the problems you're going through. When Gruen Watch was there, I think that there was radium, for the dials. So I don't know, did you inspect?
That's the building that has the TCE. We don't necessarily know it was dumped, but it's in that building that we physically cannot really do anything with. As the cool, it's got really cool space, but it's just, the air quality is so bad.
Yeah. Would it be appropriate, can the Historic Society have your contact info to continue asking any other questions they might have?
Absolutely. I'd be glad to.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Fire Department, Building Department as well for presenting your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions? Is any other? Okay. Is there a comment,
Just
Mr.
to say,
Fonso?
stay close because there could be as we discussion comes up. I mean, you can go back now. I'm just saying, be prepared because we might.
Yes, sir.
Additional
Yeah,
questions could
that's
come
true.
back up.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I'm curious on any other aspects, historical aspects, fixtures, things that may be saved in that building. And also, my question is, the comment was that there's tunnels and they're full of asbestos. Can you explain a little bit more about full? Like, is somebody just packed it down there, or are we talking about pipes that are wrapped with asbestos in these tunnels?
They're wrap pipes. So
Wrap
basically, so what you have is the original power plant had two different functions. At the time this property was originally built, there wasn't actually enough fire support, so that's why there was an actual machine in there that was a fire pump. So part of that building was a fire pump, and there was actually 4 smokestacks on the building. So if you go look at the power plant right now, you'll actually see 2 different colors of brick, one from the original power plant and then one from the secondary power plant that was added anywhere between 1910 and 1920. The power plant was the first structure, according to our records, that was built on the site. So, but to give you an idea, so you have both the fire suppression pumps that are underground, then as well as all the steam pumps. So the largest pipe I could probably say is about 3 foot around. The issue right now is at one point that flooded, there's been some other problems, and it's just the material is loose. So the true cost there is that you're going to have to HEPA-vac those areas. You're going to have to clean all that stuff up before that gets out. You can't just throw it in a plastic bag and go. So that's where the real cost is at, is just like, I can tell you last winter when I was going through the building, steam pipes were going off kind of underground underneath what we had proposed as more the parking garage, and they were just shooting in the tunnels. So as it's shooting in the tunnels, any material sitting on any of the pipes around them was falling off. And what was the most recent headquarters over the main office where the CEO and everybody had their offices, it was so bad in some of those areas they actually had portable heaters trying to keep the stuff heated to keep the water in the pipes. So again, it's more, there's so much loose material, and then of course you have the cost of the to just the boilers in there, where they basically packed asbestos between every single brick inside that boiler. So unfortunately, O'Rourke just got done taking down the brewery, and they said they're almost the exact same boilers, so they have an idea of exactly what we need to do to disassemble them. But you're still talking on the boilers $750,000 to $1 million just to manually disassemble the boilers.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mr. Ponsel?
Yes, I guess my question is, and it's been asked me, like, why the rush? Like, why do we need to take action today? What's causing that?
So 2 things. One, I don't think the existing owner plans to come in front of you anytime soon. They don't plan to come in town typically. Our concern is that if we're going to buy this and do something, I need that water off now. I don't own it. I can't shut it off. And once that material gets loose, we're done. So we're not trying. Unfortunately, it's like an unfortunate situation for all of us. Again, we made an offer to buy it quickly, not realizing that we needed the additional approvals of council. That's on us. We just didn't see the public files anywhere. But at the same time, if that damage gets worse, or say that stuff starts collapsing, we're not waiting. My biggest concern as an owner is, what is my liability if somebody dies there? And how fast can I get that thing down? That's every day we talk about what is our biggest risk here, and that is someone dying. And I don't want that on my name. I've got my family's money invested in this. My partners have their family's money invested in this. There is absolutely no way I'm going to put my name on the line for that. And that's just a fact. If it falls, we're out. I mean, that main building, the way it's set up with the wood, any type of snow load will make those upper beams collapse.
So just as a point of clarity, I think what you're emphasizing is that you want the assurance that demolition would be approved.
Correct.
If as you continue with the property purchase, not like if it were to fall, you're not going to make the purchase.
So for what I would say right now, see how you got here too, like you're saying why the rush now from our angle? Why aren't we waiting 2 or 3 months to get approvals? Because our concern is it won't make it through the winter.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that was
Yeah,
clear.
that's the concern.
Your
It won't
emphatic
make it through the
nature, I just
winter.
want to make sure it didn't come across as reversing
ma'am.
what you were saying earlier.
I'm sorry, yes. Our fear is it won't make it through the winter. And I know the current owner, that's why he wants out, because he's afraid it isn't going to make it through the winter. Fire chief is afraid it's going to make it through the winter. So maybe the concrete structures will, that main building isn't going anywhere. But the center building around the clock tower, that big one, is a wooden structure that is buckling. And that was probably the most historically significant from the front. We understand. We wanted to save it. We can't.
Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I understand. I that's a tough position. And this is, I also want to thank Mr. Rogers and Ms. Daniels for coming in tonight and speaking. And I am concerned. I know we all are about the historical aspect and historical details and maybe the windowsills and maybe cornerstones or whatever else might be in that building that could be saved. So that's a concern, and I understand how we got, where you're at so I wanted to thank you guys for coming and know that that's we are actually thinking about that and concerned about those as well. So thank you.
If there's something to be saved, we will save it. Right now.
I believe you.
Yeah.
I believe you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And you're walking through, I have a question. And you're walking through, did you notice anything that would indicate if there's a time capsule there?
I thought about what we could find underneath the slabs, but I have no idea. I mean, because every time we tear down old buildings, there's always something really cool.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
A cornerstone, but I don't know which building.
There should be a cornerstone that has a time capsule
Yes.
in one of the buildings.
Most likely, then that would probably be the power plant. The problem is, or it was the original factory that got slid back, and the question is that original factory that got slid back has a building double its size sitting there. So, but what I will tell you is there's no basement or most of that. There's tunnels around the outside and it's flat. So if there is something cool, it's probably underneath that slab somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Moore, I've asked the law director to add a little more context to why the resolution and what is the existing ordinance that requires our consideration tonight.
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. Yeah, it is rushed, and I sympathize with council. And I know when I spoke after at the end of the economic development meeting, just to give the members that were here a heads up, we were still working on the language that this was going to be here, and the faces were all like, what? And that was kind of my original thought too, is that, well, okay, it's another developer. They're just saying, you got to hurry up and do it, what I need right now. But talking to the building department and the fire department, I understand it's a difficult decision to make. It's a weird situation we're in. The ordinance, the reason we have this in front of you, the ordinance that placed the PUD overlay on this property has an unusual clause. It says that that either the planning commission or council can delay consideration of a PUD application by up to 180 days if there's a reason to think there's a possibility of saving the buildings instead of demolishing them. We're in a weird situation because we don't have a PUD application in front of us. The current owner hasn't submitted one. The proposed owner is in no position to submit one because they don't know what exactly even a first phase is really going to look like to that level of detail. And so maybe that provision in that ordinance doesn't apply, but the intent of it at the time was that it had just been bought by somebody else. I think this was right after Playing Card had sold it, And the fear was, well, they're just going to tear everything down and move forward. And we want a chance to think. We don't want to just make it easy for them to do that, because it's an awesome, at least from the street, it's a fantastic facility. It's a fantastic building. Love to say what we can from that. But our thinking was, speaking with Mr. Gary, the thought was, well, wait a minute. The idea here was to give council and the planning commission a chance to slow that down, to have a say, because otherwise, any property owner in Norwood could just go in, I'm going to file demolition permit. If it meets the requirements of that, they can tear down what they own. But we thought that was the intent, so we told PLK, they were not happy with this, but we said, sorry, we're going to have to go to council first before we're going to let you go ahead and demolish it. So that's why this is here. It's your decision. It's not mine. You've heard pretty much all the information I have. I know it's been very, very quick, but I think that they've kind of explained why it's kind of an unusual situation. And so that's where we are. But that's kind of the reason for this, and why it's not like any other resolution or ordinance I've ever had come before me when I was on council. The time will come. And just to give some other background on what will go into that site, right now, it's not zoned for residential. So they can't put they can't put whatever, that's what PLK does, is residential. They can't do that the way it is now. So there needs to be a zone change, or they have to go through the whole PUD process. So that's planning commission with the public notice and the public hearings and all the things that go with that, and then it comes to council, and council has to vote on it. So whatever project goes forward there is going to go through all of the scrutiny that the city can give, and all of the input we can get from the public and from residents and from stakeholders on what they like and what they don't like. Right now, all you have in front of you is the okay to go ahead and demolish the property on the premise that there's really no other alternative. And it's your decision whether you think that at this point, there's really no other alternative. So that's what you have, and that's really all the information I have. If anybody's got any other questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Sanker?
Question through the chair to the law director. So basically, what we are looking at is if we would say, yeah, we give permission for the partial demolition, the PUD still remains in place, so any plans would be submitted under the PUD. That does not go away. It's the PUD still there, and all plans would be submitted under the PUD, so it would all, as you were saying, has to be approved. So this would just kind of bypasses that one stipulation in the ordinance, but the rest of the PUD process will remain in place for the redevelopment of that property, correct?
Mr. Moore?
Yes, either that or council can, if planning commission, if the underlying zoning is changed to allow the uses they want to do, then, if they meet what's in the building code, they can just build it. But yes, it's going to have to go through planning commission and council before really anything happens.
Thank
beyond
you, Mr.
demolition.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem President. I just had a comment. First of all, I completely depend on Mark Reeves and Acting Chief McCabe, and really appreciate all their comments on this. My concern would be, we know how bad this, the condition of this building's been just from the outside of it. What happens if it does collapse and we have an absentee landlord sitting there? Then what kind of shape are we going to be in? We know what it's like to work with absent landlords and properties, and, who knows? It could end up in our hands again with collapsed buildings. So that's all I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. So what I think the comment that Mr. Moore made was that we just have to take their word. We have to take, so I'm sure we had Mr. Linfelter. So your presentation was very thorough, and I'm sure you were very honest. But the fact that we got this tonight, we're asked to make a decision tonight. I'm a little worried about the hastiness of the decision. I understand the cost and I certainly don't want to be liable for any type of accident that Ms. Hanrahan just stated too, but as far as us making a quick decision on Mr. Linfeller's word and Mr. McCabe and Mr. Reeves, which all are very it's a little concerning that we have to make a quick decision right here tonight on that. And so that's what I'm struggling with as far as yes or no. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. I had to give the clerk my paper. I remember Nick. Lingenfelter. Could you come back to the mic, Mr. Lingenfelter, and could you go back to the slide that outlined the violations that, I think they were violations or concerns that the EPA had identified?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm recalling that there are, I'm reading and glancing, there's 14 noted environmental concerns as of right now that have not been resolved.
Correct.
Okay, and these are you talking about in the first 60 days getting contracts in place to resolve this?
No, it'll be contracts in place
Can
to
you come back
start.
to the mic?
I'm sorry.
too?
Yes,
Thank
ma'am. It'll be contracts in place to start the demolition. That will be part of that whole EPA clearance over the next 12 to 18 months. That will be part of it. That's right. So what that is we know there's a well on site and it needs to be shut down. We have to do that. The EPA has to sign off on it. Again, back to what Mr. Moore said, this is going to be a fluid process between all of us trying to figure out what it is. We're coming back to you, letting you know, but nobody can really do anything until that gets shut down. I mean, you have the old glue tanks back there that have to be removed. Again, there's the TCE in the FAR building that the gentleman mentioned from the watch company. There's a lot of concerns they had there that just have to be addressed. And what I would tell you is the majority of the work to do the demolition, so basically all your asbestos removals or any other concerns there related to the demolition will be addressed within the first 60 days. Or the plan will be put in place to begin. Then that plan will begin within 90 days of the day we close.
Thank you. Mr. Clark and then Mrs. Hanrahan.
Thank you. Question for Mr.
Lingenfelter.
Thank you. I'll get it by the end of this meeting.
You can call me Nick.
Lingenfelter.
Thank you, Nick. I believe on one of your slides you mentioned the number of different developers that had looked at this site. And,
Correct.
Could you go over that again? Because I know it's been, over the years, quite extensive.
And what I can tell, I'm sorry, cool. So there's been 5 physical, well-known developers who we know you'd probably recognize the name, who have all had this property under contract besides us in the past 5 years. There have been roughly 15 developers, including national developers from Louisville, Indianapolis, some other places that know this area, like this space well. And ultimately they decided they either couldn't make it work or it was just not economically viable right up front. So again, there's been 5 contracts in 5 years and 15 developers over that same span who are reputable, that have the wherewithal to do it, that could not do it. One thing I want to point out too, and I forgot to mention this earlier, our founder of our company is Peter Kleekamp, and Peter founded his company in Norwood 21 years ago. So he started here buying 4 families. This site is personal to him. He calls me like, hey Nick, I'm in front of the building, what can we do? It's just, it's personal. He started here and he wants to make sure he's doing something for Norwood. So I want you to know that his first properties were here, and he knows this area well. He's by the site. He's constantly in this area, as are we. But this project is personal to him, and we want to make sure it gets done right. We're not going to put up something with our name on it. Well, we're going to own it for 20 years, and we're not proud to have our name on it. So one other thought I had for you, Mr. Brudden, is that right? Yes, the rear factory, one thing that we could possibly look at for you as well to kind of make sure we're conserving some of the history, and I'd be glad to take the Historical Society through the limited areas and show them what may or may not be salvageable, is potentially on that rear building, when we get it rehabbed, we could landmark it or something, and that way you know that building is always preserved as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Reeves and Acting Chief McCabe a question. I know you've gone through the whole building. I know the building's not secure. I've had residents call me and complain. I've made complaints to the departments. Do you feel that the buildings could collapse with the heavy snow, with the rain?
Portions of them could. I think some of the pictures that Nick showed of the beams already falling down, that's just a portion of it. There are many places throughout the building that have broken beams, cracked beams. I mean, I'm certainly not an engineer, but if we got 4, 5, 6 inches of wet snow, it could sure damage some of those that are already falling in.
I would agree with that. And then on top of that problem is, then you've got asbestos into the airstream. And, then you've got, whatever else. 14 EPA violations in phase 1. That's scary. We all know what that site up there was when they remediated that. So my concern is what can people be exposed to? Or if you've got somebody that's willing to encapsulate and take care of this stuff, fire department's all for it. I mean, that's a significant reduction to risk to the community in terms of that. What it looks like, I don't know. It's a pretty aggressive plan, I would say. They think they're going to have it down in 6 months. I hope so, but my guess would be a little bit more flexible in time frame with that. The biggest thing for us in terms of is having an ownership group that's going to communicate with building, with fire, with police. That's what we lack now in terms of how do we make sure we're doing the best we can with a building that we know is unsafe. That's been problematic for us.
Greatly appreciate your opinion on that. Can you tell me, do you have any idea how many calls police, fire are made there, would you say?
I'd have to pull them up for you. I can tell you that we make a number of false alarms, which is an all-house response. So you've got a lot of money responding there for false alarms on a consistent basis. It's kind of tailed down now, but we're getting into the season where if the property doesn't exchange hands and we have a remediation plan in place to start taking the sprinklers down, there's no heat in that building. So we're going to start breaking off the sprinkler system and adding to the problems. So it could be a lot. Police, I spoke with the police chief this morning. He wasn't exactly sure. I know that we've actually requested police to respond there. They have actually been tracking a number of break-in. I'm sure they're there with Inspector Reeves and or Fire Inspector Jones were over there with some of the police officers. And they actually can note that some areas that were taped off, the tape seal's been broken. There's people getting into nonstop, so it's significant. I don't know what the dollar cost would be. I'd have to tally that out for you over a defined time frame to let you know.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
I think, was there a hand?
Yeah.
Mr. Clark and then Mr. Braden.
Yeah, Assistant Chief McCabe kind of covered it, but another concern is not having the heat in the building, so the pipes potentially bursting and causing further damage.
The reality is this will be the second winter that we're going to have massive pipe fractures.
Like maybe tonight.
Yeah.
We don't get nervous. The fire department doesn't get nervous until we have sustained below zero temperatures for about 48 to 72 hours. That's when I start getting nervous. But even in heated spaces, we have problems with that. I mean, even when we have the cold snaps, we have that issue at Shepherd or over at EMD Melapore. It's just a reality. That is completely 100% unheated. No way, even if they were able to fire the boiler up, there's no way to capture the heat because of the number of broken windows and roof openings in that facility. We know what we'll be faced with. And at some point, we'll just have to turn it off. It's an unfortunate reality because that's our saving grace in terms of at least having some knockdown power on an initial fire. Norco's a great example. That was a sprinkler building, the sprinkler was turned off.
Where was?
Norco, the Norwood section door. It was on the corner of Rawson section. Yeah.
Very big.
Mr. Braden?
Oh, thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. So, 2 questions. Do we know when the last major, or if ever, we've had a major incident at this location? And secondly, Mr. Reeves, you've been part of the building department for quite some time now. I know you're extensive when it comes to buildings and structures in Norwood. I know that for a fact. Do you have a comment on tearing down? I mean, if you want to, do you have a comment on tearing down a historical structure here in Norwood that a lot of people are concerned about tearing down?
No, I'd love to see it saved, but it's just, when you look at you haven't had a chance to go inside, obviously. Most people haven't. It's, given the money that it would take, it's just, it's already past gone. I mean, it's a shame, but it's been 9 going on 10 years now that it's been let go. And it doesn't take long for buildings to start falling down if there's no maintenance, and there's none. This out-of-town landlord is not doing anything. It's wide open. You can't keep up with the kids that are getting in and breaking the windows. Like Tom said, there's no heat. There won't be any heat. There just won't be any heat. You can't. If they run the boiler, it's just heating the outside. It's going through the roof. It's going through the windows. And that's every building there. Pretty much every building there.
And for
basically.
For people that don't understand that, when you do not climate control a building, things deteriorate rapidly.
Very quickly.
That's the reason why we're in this situation now. Just if you want to watch a building crumble, don't touch it.
Some of the more serious, and I think Nick had one picture up there, but there's several where the roofs where beams have broken, actually split. And the fix 2 years ago was put a tarp on the roof. Yeah, that'll stop it for a while. That tarp's gone in the sun after about 2 months, and everything's getting in. So,
okay, thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
I think the other thing is residents should know that we've actively engaged the current owner to try and get them to maintain. I mean, there's been numerous health code violations sent to them, numerous building code. Fire department has cited them to court and tried to maintain this building.
Health department.
Yeah, and the unfortunate reality is the court system is a slow process, and it just doesn't pan out. The penalties for abandoning buildings just aren't there, unfortunately, and it makes it really hard. And it slows us down in terms of what we're trying to accomplish just with our normal fire prevention efforts by having people consistently involved in court on a big it's very difficult. In terms of our last major response, fire-wise, probably haven't had a major fire over there since the 70s. I think the last major response was we had a freight elevator collapse with a worker on it and turned out to be a fatality. That was probably 4 years before they moved, I think.
Yeah.
That's probably a major one, but there's open shafts in there now. I mean, there's videos of kids flying, scaling the exterior walls and getting in that building. It's actually some of the kids I recognize that were friends of my son. And I went, oh, man.
I think it's still on YouTube.
It is.
It is.
You can pull it up.
So.
I think the last incident was that the police found the squatter over there. Set up computers using their electric. Who's living there?
Security doorway.
And basically that's what happened, we think, to Norco, right?
That was our best guess in terms of what started the fire.
Right, so we're looking at an accident waiting to happen here. Right, okay.
Let me speak a little bit to the PUD if I can. This PUD is particular to just to this site and that clause about demolition. That's really all we're looking for council to do, or what Nick's looking for council to do tonight is not to exercise that demolition part of the PUD and get them to get started on this. I mean, PUD is still there. It's going to be there. Council's going to see it when they bring the plans back.
And just so we're clear, can I respond? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam President. So just so we're clear, because people are watching us and they're wanting to know what we're going to do with this historical building, and so we have a developer here that's willing to invest serious dollars. We have a building department. You've got your years into the building department and with extensive structure knowledge, and we have an acting police fire chief that are telling us that we have a hazardous building that they basically are recommending us do this. Is where we're at. So I just want people to understand that it's a tough situation to watch a building like this be demolished, but on the other hand, we have to do what we have to do. So thank you. Thanks.
Is that a question? No? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
We've had a presentation and a lot of discussion, and this is on agenda item 4 under introductory readings. We have not had a motion. Mr. Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, a question through the chair to the developer.
Yes, sir.
And Nick, is it imperative that you have all three readings tonight, or if we had one or two and then come back in 2 weeks and have the third potentially? I know it may hold you up, but just in the event that there are any additional questions or things that residents may have, as well as folks on council.
What I would tell you is our contract is up Monday. Our contract expires Monday. So we will not proceed. And that's not, I'm sorry, we're in this spot. I need to start getting this stuff going. I need to start getting the asbestos surveys going. I need to getting work and everybody in there to finalize. I'm sorry, and ultimately, we can't risk our company to, if we don't know that we can actually go forward. And that's, at that point, we would just be out and the current owner can do whatever they're gonna do. It's just a risk I can't take, I'm sorry.
Any other follow-ups, Mr. Ponsall?
Yeah, this is a question I'm hoping for maybe the law director to answer. If this doesn't get approved tonight, is there an alternate plan in place to amend the PUD or to have Planning Commission meet this week to deal with it? I mean, is this the final stop, or is there other ways that the city could deal with this?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. If this is not approved tonight, then we're not. They're walking away, and we won't have anything else to talk about. Because the PUD ordinance says either the Planning Commission or Council can push for the 180 days. There have been discussions because I've sat. The first time I heard about this was a week and a half ago, maybe, about that, and I don't know. The last couple weeks have gone really fast. There's been a lot going on. So very recently. And sitting in there with the mayor and the service safety director that's half the planning commission, and of the members that are on the planning commission now, and they're in favor of it. And so there's not really a concern the planning commission's going to decide, no, we're going to stop your demolition. It's really council. That's the one that we thought really needed to come here. The planning commission did not meet in November. They won't meet again until December 6th, I think, or December 7th, whatever it is. So this is really it. I mean, this is that either either everything moves forward or it doesn't, based on the vote that happens tonight. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you. Just had a question. In some of your other projects, were there ever any historical elements that you saved, that you worked with? I would think saving that bell tower would be greatly beneficial to you and to the project itself.
Yeah, if you notice, we actually have that as kind of the cornerstone of the main boulevard. Our goal is to do as much as we can to save it. The reason why we have to hedge a little bit is, say you start tearing that down, all of a sudden it just goes.
Correct.
I don't know what I can do. So I don't want to pigeonhole myself, but we're going to do everything we can to save it. I will tell you, I'm actually fighting to save a historic home right now in another area of town where the neighborhood really doesn't want it saved, and we want to save it and make it a clubhouse. So we've kind of seen resistance from both sides before, but again, our original plan was to save the entire building, and it just isn't feasible, and we can't continue to plug it that direction.
I renovated old houses for years. I understand how this goes and the cost associated with renovating an old building. I guess my next question would be, if you do take this and you get this, what are you going to do to secure this building or the area? Are you going to fence around it right away? What would your plan be?
So we've committed to securing all the first floor windows in every capacity we can. We'll have our people check on it as frequently as we need to. But ultimately, yes, there will be fence around for demolition. So O'Rourke or whoever that demolition contractor is will be putting fence around there. What I will tell you is there is currently fence in the back with barbed wire that kids literally climb right over. So one of my other concerns is as soon as we tell everybody we're going forward with demolition, which is one of the reasons the past week and a half I want to say we're intentionally quiet, is because now the concern is how many people are going to try to go see that thing now before it goes. And I've had that happen on another building where I had a wall collapse. It was the Civil War dance hall, and it collapsed in the middle, and we found a guy sleeping in there overnight before the demolition because he wanted to stay in the building. So there's concerns either way, ma'am. We will do our best to secure it as best as we can, but that is why the aggressive schedule. I will tell you, I did meet with Mike O'Rourke, the owner of our work, and he said, Nick, this is my schedule. I'd like to beat it, but I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to deliver a schedule I can't hit. So one of the things we will do is, because we know we're far enough along on the asbestos, we will probably start removing that asbestos before the end of the year if we close.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
Yeah, just one more question, Nick, sorry. I think I just found it, actually. You had mentioned, like, is it 3 different structures that you're potentially trying to save?
Could you
Correct.
go back to that
Yep,
slide?
I will.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry it's tilted in here, but I will. Cool. So yes, the intent is to save what would be the clock tower, to save the original factory back here and the smokestack because it is so notable.
Yeah.
And then again, we're also right now our goal is to save that as well.
Okay.
What I will also point out, just from an asbestos standpoint as well, I know you guys had talked about windowsills or something. Every bit of caulking on all these windows have asbestos in them, so they all have to be manually removed as well. So, and there is, I want to say it was 5,800 windows in the total project. It's not, there's 5,800 windows. Like when you look at the actual glazings, it's a lot. It's just it's a big task. But again, that's why we're not going with low bidder necessarily on the demolition. We're going with a company we know that has a reputation for delivering, and they do it across the city every day.
So I want to make a couple comments. Was that a hand?
No.
Okay. So at first I was not clear that you are under contract. I think that alleviated a lot of my apprehension around why would we approve demolition of something you don't even own. So it's good to hear your presentation and understand what's been invested so far in terms of trying to preserve as well as learning about what's it going to take. I appreciate hearing your timeline as well for what you're intending to do. I think what would be potentially helpful, I know there's some reservations around the speed of potentially passing this, is if the law director would be willing to help think through, could we amend this ordinance to add another section that speaks to the need for ongoing engagement? I think that there's been a statement a couple of times by Nick that you want engagement and around what will be. I recognize that's not where you're at in the process, but
It's
I'm
zoned
wondering
industrial right now.
Correct.
Yeah, so to go do anything, we're going to be back.
Yeah. I'm wondering if language around that were in this, if that would ease people's minds around passing this tonight.
I can't speak to whether it would ease any of the minds of any members of council. I'm not sure what that would be as far as what the language of a clause like that would be. Again, before they do anything, unless they're going to build a new factory, which nobody builds factories, really. I mean, it's an uncommon thing that's unlikely their plan. Unless they build a new factory, it's going to kind of have to go to Planning Commission and Council with all that entails, and that's going to include, they can sit down with the Economic Development Committee and say, hey, you're going to come in and talk to us before you go any further. You can, all of that's just already built into the zoning that's on the project now.
The PUD currently has that constraint to come before council or the planning commission, is what you're saying?
Both. Planning Commission and then council, along with, it includes, longer term public notices that there will be public hearings on it. There's an incredible amount of information that needs to be submitted with the PUD application that includes everything from landscaping and lighting to traffic flows and utilities and all the rest of that. So there are details that will come out of that, and for a project of this size, just from experience, that includes, artist renderings, it includes materials, it includes all of those things. All of that information will be made available to council and planning commission and then council when the time comes that they're ready to start building something.
Thank you for expressing that. So there's already a mechanism in place where this body would hear back. I don't think there's been a motion just yet, but I'm wondering, is there any more discussion, comments for Nick while he's up here? Okay. I know you're not leaving the room, but
No.
thank you again
Thank you,
for
Madam
coming
President.
back.
And one thing I do want to throw out there, just so I know there was some concerns. We did have full detailed budgets done by HGC, who is probably one of the most reputable, large-scale, historic contractors to do this stuff. So when I gave those numbers to you before, those were not our swag numbers. These are detailed line item by line item. So I want you to know this was not hastily done. We walked away because it did not work. And so then we said, fine, if we can find a way, what does it look like? And that's where we're at today. So
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Move we have all 3 readings of the resolution.
I don't know whose hand went up first.
Please pick one.
I'm going to. Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
I think that we all had, well, a lot of us had really good questions, and I think they were answered very well. It's in a bad, the property itself is in a bad place, and it's not necessarily the thing that we all want to do, but there's I believe, a concerted effort to try to save a significant number of the structures on the property, and the presentation very clearly went over the issues and the need for speed, along with having an assistant fire chief in the building department here as well. It seems pretty clear to me that this is something that we should do.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Clark?
Yes, thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. I completely agree. I think it's unfortunate, not something that we definitely want to happen, but I think with the current state, hearing the number of developers that have tried to make it work, keeping the historical structures in place, I'm pleased to hear that they are going to do everything they can to keep several of the structures in place, and hopefully, I think the most iconic pieces will hopefully be kept intact and be able to be used. I think it's unfortunate that we have to do this, but because of safety and concerns of that and those natures, I think we need to proceed and allow them to do what they need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you, and I'm going to echo what they said. I'm sorry, Mr. Clark and Mr. Thompson said. And, listening to Mr. Reeves and Acting Chief McCabe, I also spoke with Mayor Williams about this today. I think we were all scared to make that motion. We were going to do it, though. I think it needed to be done. I think everybody's concern is the historical value in saving what they can, and I believe that'll be done. So I think we should move ahead with this.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to have all 3 readings. Did I get that right? Okay. Call a roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Very reluctant, yes.
All present voting yes, even reluctantly. The motion passes. It's duly noted. It's not an easy place to be in. Please have the readings.
Resolution determining that demolition can go forward at parcel 651-0019-0125, former United States Playing Card Facility, and declaring an emergency. Resolution determining that demolition can go forward at parcel 651-0019-0125, former United States Playing Card Facility, and declaring an emergency. Resolution determining that demolition can go forward at parcel 651-0019-0125, former United States Playing Card Facility, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Move that the resolution be passed.
Seconded by Mr. Thompson. Any other discussion? Okay, call a roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
All present voting yes, the motion passes. Thank you all for coming to speak. All of you who did, I think there were 8-10 people very thorough, difficult conversation. I appreciate the members of council being open to considering all aspects of that. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may just, for just a second, I'll just say a very difficult vote for me. I just want to remind Nick, eventually this is going to have to come back for us, for either economic development purposes, if there's ever any incentives, or for other things. And I just want you to know that we definitely are going to remember your commitment to, work with the Historical Society and other people. So I appreciate you making that commitment. So, but we will remember, and I do appreciate you doing that. And I look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Thank you, and I'll leave my business cards if anybody needs my information. Feel free to post
Thank
on the
you.
website as well. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Thank you, Mr. Lingenfelter. Okay, that brings us to our fifth introductory reading. I do want to check with the members of council and see if there would be a motion to take a break. We're good?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, so our fifth item is now the ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to sign Exhibit 1, pressure regulating valve maintenance agreement between the City of Norwood and the City of Cincinnati to maintain the City of Norwood water system and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. I guess maybe a question to the Law Director, anybody who might know. Is there a need for us to have to do multiple readings on this tonight?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. I don't, not that I know of. It's something that came out of the consultations that have happened between Cincinnati Water Works and Norwood's Water Department and the administration, and this is the way we deal with the maintenance going forward, at least for the next 12 months. But I don't think that there's not that I know of, that there's any big rush to get it done tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. I move that we have the first reading of the ordinance.
First two?
Or let me amend that. I move that we have the first two readings of the ordinance.
Mr. Sanker, is that a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, any discussion on the motion to have the first two readings? Call a roll, please.
Mr. Bonsall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
Please have the readings.
Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to sign Exhibit 1, pressure regulating valve maintenance agreement between the City of Norwood and the City of Cincinnati to maintain the City of Norwood water system and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director to sign Exhibit 1, pressure regulating valve maintenance agreement between the City of Norwood and the City of Cincinnati to maintain the City of Norwood water system and declaring an emergency.
That brings us through the introductory readings. There are no administrative reports. There are no other requests to address council. There is no listed unfinished business. Is there any other unfinished business? Mr. Braden.
Thank you. I just want to make an announcement that Section Avenue is really looking nice and it's finished, it's complete, and thank you to all involved. We don't have to avoid that area now. So thanks all involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Sanker.
Just to follow up on what Mr. Breeden was talking about as far as streets, Highland Avenue, there's posted signs about no parking there. They're going to begin doing the curbs and cut-ins and that first, and then hopefully if the weather cooperates, well, one way or another, it has to be done, this year. So, but Highland Avenue is going to be under construction here, and so it may be a little inconvenient. Just have to duck around for now, and once it's done, I think it'll be a very pleasant drive.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker. Any other unfinished business? Okay, moving on. Any new business? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. Just wanted to provide an update. Wasson Way had their ribbon cutting for the Phase 2 part of the project that most impacts Norwood. And it was, I would say it's very successful. There were a ton of people there from Norwood, Cincinnati. Very generously, the mayor-elect, Vic Schneider, spoke, and even though he's not in yet, he was willing to represent the city in that capacity, so it was very nice of him to do that. And I'll just say it's just and a special shout out to School Outfitters, who provided a $100,000 donation to really help make that happen. So it's really great to see. I mean, the Wasson Way is an example of what happens when community members come together, and not necessarily, it wasn't originally born out of Norwood, but when people come together with an idea and they keep pushing and pushing and pushing over years and years and years, and finally things are happening, it's just really exciting. And so the next part of it is that I think they are getting, essentially within 2 years, they will be moving the other direction and they will be at Alt Park. So they've gotten really strong support from the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments, OKI, for federal transportation money. So they're moving. It's going to be starting to move the other direction. It'll be really interesting to see what the outcome looks like for how they cross Madison Road and Edwards. And interestingly enough, many people don't know, but many people do. That U.S. Bank building is in Norwood, so there's a lot of Norwood will have a lot of influence on to how that U.S. Savings, not U.S. Bank, U.S. Savings, and sorry, I did say that wrong, but there'll be some influence, I'd say, that the next administration will have, and so it'll be interesting to see how they cross the street, how they cross some of those roads, if it divots over to the crosswalk, do they create new crosswalks? So, but long story short, the Phase 2 ribbon cutting, it was, like I said, very successful. Appreciate everybody that went out. I actually went back out on the next day and saw multiple people that we knew, and people from Ward 1, people from Ward 2. It was just great to see so many families out, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how well it's used in the spring. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any other new business? One item just to keep in mind, we have kicked around the need to revisit when we will meet in December, other than that fourth Tuesday. We don't need to decide today. I did speak with the President of Council today, and hopefully we'll nail that down next regular meeting, our last meeting here in November. But that's something we still need to tend to. Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. So hopefully, like all of the appropriations ordinances and stuff, we'll have all of that done by the first meeting in December. So I would just say that there's a chance that I would think that we wouldn't need to meet potentially if, anybody's business that needs to get done before the end of the year, if just make sure that we get the stuff in and start working on it. But, I'm hopeful that potentially that could be an opportunity to allow us to spend more time with our families.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Madam President. Are you speaking of a council as a whole, or are we talking finance, or are we talking community development?
The fourth Tuesday of December is Christmas Eve.
Okay.
It is a day where we regularly would meet.
Sure. Okay.
And since we do not want to meet, we previously discussed that, we do not want to meet on Christmas Eve. Mr. Bonsall's comment was simply, if we have business to take care of, maybe trying to make sure that business is all complete by the first meeting.
Absolutely.
The second Tuesday. My comment was more, if we do need to have a second meeting, we can decide that at the next regular meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Any other new business? Alrighty, we'll move on to communications. The first being the Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding liquor license fees. Do you have a letter?
This is it.
Yes, it. Okay. You want to read the type? Okay. Being that this is a listing of the licensing fees distributed, there is nothing to read, but we would need a motion to receive and file. Mr. Braden.
Motion to receive and file the letter.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Is there a second? Mr. Thompson. Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, call a roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
Next is Mayor Williams regarding Mayor's Court fines for October 2019.
Dear Madam President and members of council, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of October 2019. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Thompson?
Move we receive and file the letter.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Hanahan?
I would like to thank Mr. Conlon for adding on here, if everybody noticed, the total number of tickets processed, not just what went through court. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanahan. Any other discussion? Oh, Mr. Braden.
Oh, thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. Is that something that you recommended?
Yes, it is, Mr.
Nice work.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. Any other discussion? The motion is to receive and file. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, sir.
And our last is the OKI Regional Council of Governments regarding appointment to Board of Directors.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, the term of your current representative on the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments Board of Directors for 2019 will expire upon convening the Board of Directors of the Council on January 9th, 2020. In order for the new Board of Directors to be duly convened at the Board of Directors meeting, it is requested that your agency submit the name of its appointment to the OKI Board of Directors. The OKI Articles of Agreement require that persons representing counties, cities, townships, or planning agencies must be selected by the governing body of that organization. When your agency has taken official action to designate its representative, please return the enclosed form to the Secretary. Your reply is needed as quickly as possible and no later than January 3rd, 2020. Representation on the OKI Board of Directors is not a commitment to fund OKI. Non-federal monies to operate OKI are obtained mainly from participating counties through funding agreements. The purpose of local representation on OKI is to assure that work on behalf of the region is responsive to local needs. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated. Sincerely, Mark R. Polisinski, CEO/Executive Director.
Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. So this is an important position because there's a lot of money, federal money that OKI gets, and I think there's a lot of opportunity that potentially we've been missing in Norwood by, not working with them more on projects. I would recommend that we basically leave this for the new council on January 1st when they have their meeting and let them pick the person, because it could. The mayor-elect may want to be the representative, so I would recommend that we let them decide on January 1st and not pick somebody today.
Thank you, Mr. Monsell. Mrs. Hanrahan?
Thank you. I would agree that's the way it's typically done.
Mr. Sanker?
Then I would think in the motion, when you make the motion, that we receive and file and place this on the agenda for the January 1st meeting, so it doesn't fall through the cracks somewhere.
I'd like to add a comment, just a little more context. So I am in agreement that the next council does need to solidify this. This comes with a whole meeting schedule, so I think it would be appropriate to make sure that the potential representative can at least look that over before January 1 when they have to agree to show up at a year's worth of meetings. So I think it would be helpful if the clerk of council's office could communicate this need to the incoming representatives. It does have to be an elected official who serves in this capacity, but we can receive and file and make sure this information is shared with the future council so they can at least be thinking about it before that January 1 meeting. Mr. Braden and then Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Madam President Pro Tem. Am I correct in thinking that this is Ms. Lake held this position?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I move that we request this item be added to the January 1st, 2020 agenda for the new council, and that the clerk of council communicate that to the incoming members.
Do you want to add that we also receive and file?
Yeah, I would love to add that. Thank you.
Okay. Is there, Mr. Braden, is that a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to receive and file, to place this on the January 1 council meeting agenda, and to have this forwarded on to the future council through the clerk of council's office. Any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
That takes us through all of our communication items. Our next agenda item is the excuse absent members. As always, it's tricky to me to remember. Do we actually do that? We do have one absent member. I don't know why. That's always puzzling to me. Mr. Braden.
A motion to excuse the absent member.
Mrs. Hammer, has that a second? Any other, no discussion? Okay. Yes, is there any discussion? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bronson?
I would move that we adjourn.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.